Good evening. We're going to call the meeting to order. This is the Walker Planning Commission meeting for February 1st. The first item on the agenda is review the meeting minutes from January 18th. Any comments, questions, additions, subtractions?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Motion by Scott. Is there support?
Support.
Support by Terry. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved. Next item on the agenda is general public comment. I guess we got some public here. This is provided if you want to make a comment on something that is not on the agenda tonight. Not the case we have on the agenda. If you want to make a comment about something, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record. Seeing that there is none, we will move on. Case number 22-007, public hearing, amended preliminary area site plan review, proposed 186 unit townhome residential development, 330, 350, 740 Greenridge Drive Northwest. Brandon Simon from Progressive A&E, Scott Wierda, Jade Ventures. First thing we're going to go to is the staff report. So Frank.
All righty. Well, good evening, everyone.
Hold it.
Whoops.
I think we need a
Motion to remove from the table.
Move from the table.
So you making that motion?
I offer that motion.
Is there support?
Support.
Motion by Terry, support by Pat to remove this case from the table. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. Now we'll move on to Frank.
All right. Take two. Here we go. Well, good evening, everyone. We've last reviewed this plan on June 1st in 2022, so it's been a while. And my role for tonight is trying to help the public and the Planning Commission decipher updates to the plan and then point out what were the tabling conditions from June 1st and see what's on the plan, what potentially isn't on the plan, and to allow the public hearing to proceed because the public hearing on June 1st was suspended by the Planning Commission. So we're back to a review of what we call the preliminary area site plan for this site. So what I'd like to do, if it's okay with the chair, is I'll kind of go through an outline of my staff report. We also have a staff report from Scott Connors, our city engineer. So I'm not going to take up too much time, but I just want to try to paint the picture for you folks here and give a little bit of a look back and then take a look at the revised plans. Okay. So I did provide a staff report, and everything that's involved with this application is on the website, including a link back to all of the application material from June 1st. So everything the city has is on the website for public review. My staff report for this meeting is dated January 24th, 2023. And the report starts first with a look back to the administrative functions from June 1st. We've already talked about one of those, which was the public hearing was opened and it was suspended. So I assume the Planning Commission is going to reopen the public hearing tonight once we get through some review of the plans. That's why the notice cards went out again, and the notification met the State of Michigan Zoning Enabling Act, we call it. So we re-noticed according to state law for another public hearing. So that's administrative item 1, is to take the suspended public hearing and put it back into play. And then item number 2 is the tabling motion from June 1st had multiple conditions attached to it. So I'm going to refer back to many of those conditions. There were 2 conditions in tabling that we actually completed. There was a neighborhood meeting, as I understand it, and then we also did a site walkthrough, and many of you folks joined us on that walkthrough. So we completed items 3 and 4 from the tabling, and then we can talk about items 1 and 2, including the punch list on 2. So moving through, this site is zoned RPUD2, and what that means is that the zoning is already there for a residential planned unit development for high density. And as I understand it, that zoning was put into place in 1989, which is quite a while ago, and there was a preliminary plan approved at that time as well That's fairly similar to the plan we're looking at, but it was in 2 dimensions more than 3 dimensions. It wasn't a construction plan, it was a preliminary plan. That plan has long since expired, so then the applicants were required to go back through the application process, and that's why we're all here. I did provide the Planning Commission with links to our zoning code, because everything the Planning Commission does when it comes to review of a plan should tie back to something in the zoning ordinance. So you see things like references to section, XYZ of Chapter 94, that's our zoning code. And then I also provided the specifics for some zoning issues that are specific to the RPUD district. So I know that's more technical, but really this board's job is to take a look at the technicals and make sure that the plans meet those standards. From an updated staff analysis, I did go back to our previous planning director's letter because I thought she did a good job with her initial report. And instead of repeating all of that, what I did was my report took her report and the tabling conditions and said what's missing, essentially. It also provided a little bit more of an existing land use analysis, some issues that I have raised and the city engineer is going to address in more detail. But I want to go through a couple of those things too. From a land use standpoint, we have stormwater is an issue, to say the least, in the Alpine Walker Drain in York Creek. In a previous life, when I worked for Grand Valley State, I was part of a York Creek watershed project. Mr. Connors was part of that as well. And the reason we have stormwater ordinances in Kent County is because of the York Creek project. So it was really the York Creek and Bear Creek were kind of the 2 polar opposites of stormwater impacts in the county. And if you want to know why, the next time you drive on Alpine Avenue from I-96 to 4 Mile, just look and you'll see this big dip. And that big dip is the beginning of the Alpine Walker Drain. And the Alpine Walker Drain runs downhill. It almost functions like a mountain stream. It hits York Creek. York Creek goes down to the Grand River. It's an unstable system. We learned that back in the 90s. And following up on that project, we developed a stormwater code. And we also did some improvements to Alpine Walker Drain. The city engineer will talk about maybe some work that still needs to be done there. So we know stormwater is an issue in Alpine Walker Drain. This site plan as projected has a divide in it. So half of the site will drain to the Alpine Walker Drain. The other half goes to an unnamed watercourse at the southeastern end of the site. And, from a watershed management standpoint, I think that's something we really need to take seriously because when I was under the York Creek Watershed Project, I would talk to folks who'd been around for decades, and they would say, we used to be able to step over the Alpine Walker Drain. And if you go down there now, you can see that's not the case. So we certainly don't want to repeat, the problems of the past. We're smarter than that now, and we certainly should apply what we've learned, especially to this southeasterly drain, which runs right downhill, very similar to York Creek. So that's a little bit of editorial on stormwater management and some of the history that I have up in this part of town. From a density standpoint, I did go through an analysis. The previous planning director talked a little bit about density, and I just wanted to get a couple of things out there for findings of fact, which is the site zoned RPUD2. Well, how do you define what's a reasonable density for an RPUD project on a vacant site in this location? So I gave a little bit of advice that comes out of the master plan. And our 2020 master plan talks about things like a cluster development or a traditional development. So I gave some comments on there. However, whichever way you want to define this site, either as clustered or non-clustered, you're looking at a density of 4 to 5 units per acre. And I put the math in the report to show some of the work. But for an RPUD2 project in Walker, that's a very reasonable density. We have RPUD projects that in Standale that are 10 units per acre. So the density is reasonable on this site from a zoning standpoint, my opinion. But I did put some comments in here that I highlighted in yellow that really we should start developing some findings of fact here to start checking some boxes. And, is this a cluster development or not? What's the density? Make some findings on that. And then also, when it comes to the master plan, does this preliminary plan reasonably implement what's shown in your future land use plan and your community character map? because those are two kind of deeper levels of detail. One of them talks about preserved open space overlay and neighborhood preservation. So I gave some of my comments about how I went into that and tried to make some kind of a reasonable explanation of what this project is doing to be consistent with the master plan. However, those are items for the Planning Commission to discuss, and hopefully you can develop some findings on that. Roads, traffic, transportation, and utilities, I'm going to defer that to the city engineer. That's outside of my expertise, other than the stormwater issue that I've already raised. And to close, on page 7 of 8 in my staff report, I provided a review of what were the conditions from the June 1st tabling, both out of the previous planning director's staff report and the specific tabling items that the Planning Commission attached to the motion. So I'll go through those. I've got 9 of them, and I'll try to make it quick. There's a technical thing involving 402 Dakota Drive Northwest. That's technically in Alpine Township. We don't have any jurisdiction over that. It should really come off the application, and the legal description should be updated. Item number 2 is very significant. The 2 stormwater detention basins for this site are proposed within a 150-foot buffer, and the 150-foot buffer is the outcome of a 1989 consent judgment between private parties. So that's something that I think we need to get clarified, and I'm glad the city attorney is here tonight. I do think we need some kind of a formal opinion on that. It may not happen tonight, but to me, that's very significant to have those detention basins and all the mass grading and clearing in that 150-foot buffer. So then we get into item number 3, which is we talk about some project, the trails and footpaths. They need to be shown on any future construction plan for detail. Route and construction material, same goes for playground equipment and the dog park. We need a construction schedule and Gantt chart form on the cover sheet. Any what we call planned unit development benefits should be shown on the plan. Typically that comes down to signage, setbacks, building height. I didn't see any on here, but if that is an issue, we should get those on the plan and we should discuss those. The landscaping plan is good for a preliminary area site plan. More detail to that if this project moves forward. And then we also have some final area site plan details that we need to get for maintenance, building, trash collections, dumpsters, and mail kiosks. Number 9 is the big one, and that's where we're going to segue over into the city engineer. And those are a comprehensive stormwater impact analysis for both receiving streams, Alpine Walker Drain and the one to the southeast. A Kent County Drain Commission update on the Alpine Walker Drain and York Creek. An official wetlands delineation to Eagle standards, and then a private well analysis with Kent County Health Department. So that's what I'm going to get out of the way and hand it over to the city engineer. I'll be glad to answer any questions as we go further into this review.
Any questions for Frank initially? Scott?
Well, we reviewed this plan back in May of '22, and the layout really hasn't changed much. So my report looks almost the same. And I don't want to be too redundant and go through because I think the crowd's probably about the same, and I know we're about the same in terms of our makeup up here with the Planning Commission and staff. A couple things to reiterate. This is with a PASP and a traditional PASP. We do not require all the final engineering detail. I think at this point the big issues are the zoning and the density. How do we interpret the buffer and a lot of those kinds of things, and then general layout for utilities and drainage. And then if it moves forward, we get into a lot of detail on those things. That doesn't mean that you have to push those things off to the final area site plan. You can talk about those now as well, but certainly not final detail. If you look through the report, I guess maybe I'll just key in on a couple items. Drainage is one of them in the notes that I had last time. There were a couple of items to address. Frank got into some pretty good detail with the Alpine Walker Drain, and he's got a long history there. What we've done since that meeting is we've had some meetings with Alpine Township and the Kent County Drain Commissioner, and in one of those meetings, Brandon Simon, the developer's engineer from Progressive, actually helped facilitate that meeting, and we talked through what a stormwater analysis would look like. And I think for you folks, it's similar to what we see on a lot of the difficult sites. It's going to be an existing versus proposed flow and flood elevation, where we end up with usually a pretty good chart that's kind of an easy to understand review of what this site looks like before development, what it looks like after development, and hopefully something that can let you know with some level of comfort that it's not going to make it worse. They're going to have enough detention. They're going to help force a lot of water back into the ground and do things like that. So that's a requirement. They're going to have to do that. In addition to that, our collective and collaborative meeting caused the drain office to take a closer look at the Alpine Walker drain, irrespective of the development. And that does need some work. They were out there, and because it's a county drain, it's not part of the city system necessarily. They can assess the public partnerships and the public watersheds that go into that. That means Walker, Alpine Township, MDOT because of Alpine Avenue and because that pavement flows into here, and also a part of Kent County property. And so right now they're working on a plan to clean out and fix some of the revetments and the slope stabilization in that drain. And whether this project goes forward or not, that is now on their to-do list. And it's probably going to cost us about 64.3% of the total cost, which is a pretty precise number. That's a pretty precise number because it's all been laid out in the past. This is an area that we watch very closely, and when there's repairs that are needed, we have this ratio that we fall back on, and that's how it's paid. Typically, that's not assessed to the residents. Typically, that's paid by the municipalities and public agencies. In this case, the county is going to work with the developer because of their potential contribution to the drain, and have them account for their frontage, which would be that part of the drain that runs through their property. So that's all stuff that's going to be ongoing even without a development. The southern part of the site, there was some question last time about where that outletted, and we weren't really comfortable with what they were proposing. If you can see on the picture that's in front of you there, the southern stormwater pond was outletting kind of south and east through between two lots, and we weren't really happy with that because if you go south one more lot, that's where the natural channel is that outlets all of Greenridge apartments, and that's, it's much more appropriate for an outlet. So if they move forward, they'll have to size that outlet such that it mimics the existing contribution of water in that area, and that's something that we'll watch very closely. When Greenridge went in, there were some problems there, and there's a natural pond that water goes through, and a couple of times during big storms there was a lot of sediment that went into it. And so the Public Works Department, Engineering Department, we're all out there trying to help the resident. And I believe the developer upstream ultimately had to come in and clean a lot of that out because it was from a private project, just like this would be. And we'll be there to help if that was to happen. So again, that collaboration with our regional partners is something that we're going to lean on heavily, and I think it's going to continue. The developer also turned in a trip generation analysis, which we didn't have last time. Really no surprises there. They expect that the project would contribute about 1,400 trips a day, which seems like a big number, but when you look at the adjacent roads and their capacities, it's not too bad. There's a map that's in my report that I think can help, and it shows about 4,200 cars on North Center Drive that outlet to Alpine Avenue. Two-lane road, you typically have about a capacity 10,000 cars per day. So that road's pretty underserved, and we're in good shape. Further to the south, it's a little bit of a different story. You've got almost 15,000 cars at Center Drive and Alpine, and that's a real hot spot that we've been watching for a long time, mostly related to Alpine. And we also have a roundabout that's scheduled to go in there to help serve that commercial and apartment property at the corner of Weatherford and Center, and we think that's going to help as well. But I think it's appropriate for you folks to ask for some more information or some questions about that trip generation. And then last thing was that there was some talk about asbestos last time, and the developer worked with the city of Grand Rapids, and Grand Rapids ultimately went out and did 5 soil borings within the area that soil was filled in from the Springbrook sanitary sewer job, and we discussed that kind of at length through the public hearing part of last meeting. And the good news was out of 5 soil borings, they had a summary of ND, which is none detected. So there was 0 asbestos in that embankment fill material that was put in there. That's really good news, and I think we can put a check by that. That's not going to be a contributing factor to any of the work out there. So that's kind of what's new on my report, and certainly would be glad to answer any questions you have.
Any questions from the commission to the engineer? Go ahead.
Scott, when you were talking about the collaboration between the Drain Commission office, the two communities, and the developer, it's one thing to come up with a plan, the other is the implementation of it. What would be the timetable we'd be expecting for that?
Well, I would expect to have the report certainly before the FASP takes place. I think they're already working on it now, and I would ask them for an update on how that's going. You know, a narrative update's not going to help you a whole lot. We want to see science. We want to see facts and figures, but it's certainly fair to ask and to get an update on that. But the timing for that, if you'd like to see it at this stage, I think you'll have to make that clear as a planning commission. But we know that we'll get it before anything happens out there.
Because my observation would be that that would be important information to evaluate the site plan, along with wetlands, which was another thing that we had asked for at the meeting back in June, and I don't see that within here. But that'll be a question I'll pose to the applicant when they have their time to talk.
Yeah, and it does look like they detailed the wetlands. I'm not sure they labeled it. They were supposed to put who did it, what time they did it, or what date they did it, and some things like that. But based on the level of survey detail, it's very tight, which means it was probably flagged, and then the survey crew went out and got that. But absolutely fair game to ask for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Scott? At this time, we'll ask whoever's presenting for the developer to come forward and give us an update on the items we asked for, where they stand, and what we are looking at. This water seems to be a big one, so.
All right, Brandon Simon, I'm with Progressive AE, civil engineer on behalf of the developer. So just kind of wanted to give a quick update on the project, where things are at, and what's changed since we were in last time. So as was mentioned, it was in last summer. The project as a whole is still a mixture of 4 and 6 unit buildings, and the overall unit count has stayed the same at 186 as last time. Still split into 3 phases, so the plan is still start from the south. Phase 1 would bring an entrance online, Phase 2 would bring a second entrance online, and then Phase 3 would be the northernmost portion. In working through some of the outstanding items, we had an additional meeting with city staff in December, I think, Frank, maybe. And we came up with a couple other items and a couple things that we needed to address. So pairing that together with the resident comments from last time, one of the things that came up was that the topo needed to be updated. The first preliminary plans were using a dated topo, so we did go out, updated the topo in July of this year. The current plans that you're looking at have that current topo information. Stormwater analysis and Kent County Drain Commission coordination, as Scott had mentioned, is in progress. To answer your question, Terry, that report is not complete at this point. That's something that we would ask would be a condition of approval. It's a fairly lengthy study, and as Scott mentioned, it would be an FASP thing that if the report does generate some item that needs to be repaired or fixed, for lack of a better term, that would be something we would work closely with the city, Drain Commission, and Alpine Township because they're impacted north of our site. The wetland delineation was carried out. I don't have a final report for you yet. The wetland delineations have to be done at a specific time for Eagle to okay them. We were able to do a delineation actually just a few weeks ago before we had snow on the ground. But that said, plants aren't thriving and growing like they would be in the spring. So that needs to be checked in the spring. The line work is on the page, and we intend to work with our environmental consultant and Eagle moving forward, should any of those turn out to be regulated wetland. As you'd expect, most of the wetland is through the drain. There are a few pockets upland that were identified, so we'll continue to work with our wetland consultant on those, and we'll provide you guys with that report once that's finalized. For the 150-foot buffer, we did do a little looking at the consent judgment. I have a copy of that if you need it. I believe that's in the report also. The way we understood that, the consent judgment reads that no buildings or physical facilities should be within that 150-foot buffer. At this point, the only thing we're proposing within that buffer is the stormwater detention pond. No structures, no buildings. It's a dry pond, so it's not going to be water there. It'll look like a grass berm, and 95% of the time, unless there's a rain event, in which case it empties out in 24 to 72 hours. As Scott had mentioned, we did a traffic impact analysis. This is a trip generation study. So this is kind of a high level, identify how many trips are going to be created by this development. Scott had given some numbers. It's about 3.5% of what you see on Alpine on a daily basis is what comes out of this study, just for a frame of reference. And then the last thing I think it was mentioned was a private well impact analysis. And my understanding was that was a partner comment to the potential asbestos that was a concern in the stockpile on site. Scott had mentioned the city did some testing on that. Asbestos and contaminants were not identified as an issue, so the private well analysis was not moved forward. I think those are the big things we did address. And then from a site standpoint, it was pointed out that we have moved stuff around a little bit, so the driver behind that is erosion. As it's been brought up multiple times, the York Creek drain is highly susceptible to erosion. So previously when this came in, there were units on the west side of our northern chunk closest to the drain. We've removed those units and tried to kind of recluster things internal on the site. And the intent there is that we're removing high impact development and grading and things like that along that stream bank, and we're going to keep more natural vegetation there to help combat the erosion moving forward. So that's a high level overview. Scott Wierda is here also on behalf of the developer. So if there's any development questions, Scott can speak to that. Otherwise, I will answer whatever questions you guys might have. Thank you.
Any questions, Commission? Go ahead. You may want to stay up there for questions.
All right, in terms of the traffic information that you provided, it's giving some estimates based upon particular types of uses and what they generally would generate. I would think that the analysis should go a little bit further and take a look at some of the intersections, public street intersections that, especially intersecting streets onto Alpine Avenue, and what the relative impact would be with this additional development. And I think it would also be fair to somehow factor in the fact that the city does have a project online and scheduled to take place for replacing the traffic signal with the roundabout, which I think, to be fair, should be factored into how that traffic will move into in that area as this develops.
Yeah, I can coordinate with Scott on that. I'm not the traffic engineer in our office, so I didn't generate this report. I can only speak to it at a high level. But I can work with our traffic engineers and have them touch base with Scott and the city on trip generation stuff that they may have in-house on the roundabout. And we can push that report forward to a full traffic analysis or full traffic report, I should say. This is just a high-level trip generation used to kind of show the level of impact. As I had mentioned, it's about 3.5% of what you're seeing on Alpine daily. Had that been a more substantial thing, it would certainly warrant a full-blown traffic report. But in this case, that's why the full traffic report wasn't pursued, at least at this stage.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead.
You had indicated that the topo was updated in July, which is, I think, appreciated by all, working with some good current information. Did that include updating what the tree cover is on the overall site?
So we actually flew the site with a drone, and I can provide an updated aerial on that too, but we have updated some tree lines. The big focus of that topo was contours on especially that big mound. That was not on our previous topo. So we made sure and got that area picked up very well. And a lot of times on the, I guess just from a technical standpoint, on a drone survey, we weed those out to not include tree shots because it makes the ground look weird. So we tend to rely on an aerial for the updated tree cover. So we do have updated tree cover from the drone aerial.
And that, again, from the standpoint of the Planning Commission evaluating this, especially as you look at the east side of the site, there's areas that are identified for the stormwater facilities, which I think represents a physical facility in my estimation because of the type of groundwork and regrading that's associated with that. Identifying more precisely what type of impact it'll have on the vegetation, the trees, especially along those perimeter areas.
Yeah, we can certainly provide an exhibit with perhaps an aerial underlaid so that you can see more clearly where the defined tree areas are. There's it's kind of a gray area too, where it's tree line versus scrub brush versus, whatever. So I can certainly update that. We can come up with, in those, I guess, more sensitive areas, shoot individual large diameter trees and that type of stuff wouldn't be unheard of. So there's things we could do to bolster the surveys in those sensitive areas if that would be required. Yep.
Thank you.
Other questions for the applicant? There has been some emails thrown around about construction equipment out there. I'd like Scott to update us on that, and as he knows more about it than I do, so.
Yeah, maybe a quick public service announcement. I know we're supposed to be working with you guys, but we've got such a great audience. I think this is a good time. The Kingsbury Pump Station, which is a sanitary sewer pump station at the end of Kingsbury and Gage, just on the east side of that neighborhood, is going to be rebuilt this year. It's a very old pump station, doesn't have a backup generator or anything like that. So the good news, that's going to be completely reconstructed with a generator, and it's going to include a new force main, which is how they pump the wastewater up to the gravity sewer, and that's going to be coming through the old driving range and up to the intersection of Greenridge and Springbrook. So if you start to see equipment pop up out there, and later this week and early next week, you might see some trees coming down within that 20 or 30 foot wide easement, it's for this public project. So I want to make sure that everybody knew that. It's not the developer getting a jump on the project. It's working on the utility system and making sure our infrastructure is in place and ready to support that part of Walker. So thanks.
Yeah, there was a few emails going around, and some people just weren't happy. So, any other comments from the developer?
That's it on our end, unless there's other
Any
questions.
Go ahead, Pat.
I see that there was a neighborhood meeting. What came of that in June? What is your synopsis of that?
I did not attend that meeting. I can have Scott speak to.
Good evening, Scott Wierda, CWD Real Estate Investment, and also one of the owners of the property for the last 25 years or so. We did have the at the recommendation of the commission, we did have the neighborhood association meeting. It was kind of an open forum of look at plans, discuss it. It was lively, but polite and respectful at the end, and so I think as far as I could tell, there was certainly appreciated. Clearly, conversations about type of project, quality, the things like that. But kind of the things you would typically expect in that type of a meeting. I'm sure people can represent their own opinions on it, but overall, I thought it was a worthwhile time. So happy to answer any specific questions on that, though.
No, thanks.
How do you see working out the 150-foot buffer zone that some people will say you shouldn't even touch?
Yeah, well, it's a consent agreement, judgment that was worked out well before we owned it, so back in the 80s. in the way we read it and understand it and had been advised, it's related to structures. I mean, simply that. It was a 150-foot buffer of structures, and referenced, I don't have the specific language in front of me, but minimalizing, use and disruption of trees and things like that. Didn't get into grading. Certainly had been advised that you can grade in there as needed and those type of things, but we have a long history together here. We've owned a number of properties in the community, and my partners and I own a lot of properties in multiple communities in this area. So we're seldom, if ever, confrontational on anything. It's not our approach. We want to work within the constraints of that, work within to do a quality project. I certainly don't want to add to something that was already settled back in the 80s, but anything reasonable within our ability to use our property, we're wide open to.
Other questions? Thank you.
Sure.
This brings us to opening the public hearing. We have the city attorney here. That's to make sure I don't say something stupid. I'm going to make a little bit of a speech here just to frame the public hearing, because we could go through an awful lot of what we've already gone through. I went through and highlighted the last public hearing, and I could go what everybody said, from Tom and Linda all the way, Cindy Coleman, Barry Bonobles, Linda Lanning, and all of everything that everybody stated. We don't want to rehash that. That's in writing. That's in the record. We understand that. This is zoned RPUD2. What the developer is proposing is RPUD2. That gives them by right the right to develop it. We understand people want their open spaces. We understand people like the wild animals. That's not the framework we work in as a planning commission. We work in the framework of the zoning and the rules on what they can do in that zoning. So if you come up and you say, what about the deer? It's not in the zoning. That's not what we do. I'm not saying I don't care. I'm just saying we can have an awful long evening tonight talking about deer. And we all understand that. We're all neighbors here, and I understand exactly what you guys are feeling, or I empathize with what you are feeling, and most everybody up here does. So we'd like you to address this commission and not the developer. We'd like you to be specific in what you're talking about, and we'd like it to address things that haven't been addressed before. We know there's water problems. I think everybody that's going to get up there should say, I agree there's water problems. Then we can all agree. And that's one of the big things we have to look at. We know there's problems. We've solved some of the issues. You've heard we solved the asbestos. There's been a wildlife study. They're doing the wetland delineation, all that stuff. They're following the rules. So we'd like constructive comments, and not be personal to anybody or anything, but just constructive comments on what you feel is good or bad for the city here. So if I can get a motion to continue the public hearing.
So moved.
Support.
Motion by Steve, support by Pat, to continue the public hearing. The public hearing is now open. Please approach this podium, state your name and address for the record. You will have 3 minutes. I will raise my hand when you have 10 seconds left.
Good evening, I'm Linda Altmeyer, 400 Dakota Drive, and gee, it's tough to be the first one because I don't know if I'm going to be within your parameters, but I'll try. I'm going to kick off with some historical perspective. During the first 10 years I lived in my home, a majority of Greenridge Country Club members voted to sell the club and all of its property and apply the proceeds to the building of Egypt Valley Country Club. The developers who bought the property submitted a PASP to the city that included rezoning of the entire country club property. The city leaders at that time were excited about the proposal, especially the commercial frontage on Alpine. The mayor told me that it was going to be a huge boon for the city and we'd be on the wrong side of progress to oppose it. The handwriting was clearly on the wall. The Greenridge and Kingsbury neighbors put up a good fight to save the rezoning acreage abutting our neighborhoods, but the developers prevailed and the rezoning was approved. But here's the thing. The rezoning was wrong for our neighborhood then, and it's still wrong now. The PASP under review tonight threatens the character of our neighborhood and fails to uphold elements of the 2020 master plan, including neighborhood preservation, conserving natural spaces, tree canopies, and wetlands. Since last spring, in submitting and resubmitting PSAPs to this commission, Jade Pig has shown little interest in fully complying with the commission's requirements, most recently those in the tabled motion of June 1st. Our neighborhood shares the commission's concerns regarding drains and drainage, waterways and wetlands, and any adverse impact on the flow through the Alpine Walker drain. Additionally, our neighborhood is almost entirely dependent on well water, and we are greatly concerned about potential impact on our wells. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Tom Altmeyer. I live at 400 Dakota. That was my wife Linda you just heard from. I'll shorten my presentation. One of the comments I wanted to talk about was the wetland study that was in process 2-3 weeks ago. I spent about 4 days afterwards walking the property, all areas of the property, to see what they identified and what they did not identify. The information that was identified did not include the historical. There's a long-term historical wetlands where there was a property, or through the middle of the property was kind of a wetlands area. There's 2 ridges that funnel down and they run into our subdivision. Steve Ferris's house is the main property that is affected by this. Any heavy rain, the water runs on both sides of this property. His house becomes an island when this is happening. So that is one area that wasn't marked as wetlands, but I think should be considered. Second area of that is the north end stormwater drain, which is currently set at 40 feet, not as 150 feet as requested by the Planning Commission. This proposed basin includes areas that are probably wetlands. Some of the development, the townhouses, are set on wetland property as now identified. The other big point was back in the 80s, the golf course used to have a big pond down at this end of the development. They filled it in back in the 80s. I'm sure they went through the proper procedure to fill in that pond. But if you dig down 6 feet to put in the stormwater retention pond, you're going to find the old pond will start coming bubbling right up in that area. So that whole stormwater retention pond on the north end of the property is going to be subject to some wetlands potential. Once again, I would like to see a more defined wetland study to the EGLE standards before the PSAP is approved. And I think the private well analysis, to me, wasn't tied to the asbestos issue. For the June 8th meeting with the developer, neighborhood development, somebody asked a question about wells, and the developer says, well, once the PSAP is approved, any well issues are not our problem. So thank you for your consideration.
Good evening. I'm Robert Johns. I live at 368 Dakota Northwest, and I will shorten my remarks. I respect Tyler's comment with not going over those same items again. But as Tom just mentioned, though, the private well analysis that was discussed and requested at the last meeting, I'm not sure if that has been completed or not. And again, I was not under the impression until this evening that that was tied in with only the concern about asbestos on the hill over the former driving range. So I feel like for us as homeowners, that's still a bigger concern than just maybe the area that's, was concerned, that we had concerns about with the asbestos. I think at the neighborhood meeting that we did have with the developer back in June, there was a question asked about the potential impact of this project, on the well and septic systems, because there are about 100 of us in that Greenridge area that have well and septic systems. We were concerned, obviously, about any negative impact. The response that we received was that the developer really would not be responsible for that or for any negative impact. I also am concerned about the new sewer main that is proposed to run between our house and our neighbors, the Nortons at 362 Dakota. In addition to the environmental impact of the project, I don't understand the reason for the new sewer main. How will this be installed to connect from the elevation of Dakota Northwest down to the former golf course driving range? How does adding more water from Dakota Northwest to the bowl impact the area that is already perpetually wet? What will be the impact on the existing well and septic systems of the homes in this proposed zone? Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Annie Hamill. I live at 355 Glen Oak Drive. I cut my speech in half as well to save time. So the removal of vegetation will permanently alter the area's ecosystem. The vast array of mature trees and plants work as an integrated network, and once removed, it's not able to be replicated or replaced. We're also worried that the development will also contribute, like we talked about the traffic conditions on Alpine, and we are worried, although it's not in the plan right now, that they will try to solve this problem by connecting it to our Greenridge neighborhood, which would impact the quality of life and the safety of neighborhood residents. Finally, I would like to thank you, the Planning Commission, for making the time back in June to go walking on the proposed site, and we urge you to consider those observations and these points when you consider the developer's plans. Thank you.
Good evening. Robert Parent, 374 Dakota Drive. Aside from the many environmental concerns with the proposed development, another consideration is the living conditions with the adjacent and surrounding area neighbors. Walker's Community Vision stated in their master plan that new and redeveloped areas respect existing neighborhood characteristics. The PASP does not achieve compatibility with the multifamily rental development and are bordering large lot single-family home neighborhoods at all. The landscape views, privacy, light and noise levels that we've grown accustomed to in the Greenridge community will be negatively impacted by this housing project. Our neighborhood character of natural, mature landscape will be permanently changed due to the projected land grading and excessive tree removal. The 500 plus additional people, traffic, building, and street lighting will increase our levels of light and noise pollution, as well as result in lack of privacy. The use of a visual buffer zone, or maintained wooded area as they call it, to provide a transition between our community and the proposed development is not applicable to me and several of my other neighbors, as we live on the northeast side of Phase 3. Our homes are 25 to 30 feet above the floor where the ground level is going to be, where they're going to start to build. Due to the elevation of our homes, we'll be looking directly onto this community of paved streets, parked vehicles, and multi-story buildings. Our view on the north end phase also includes a larger than a football field size stormwater detention pond that is positioned 40 feet from my property line. The detention basin structures are inside the 150-foot buffer zone, as others have discussed. On a side note, on the ponds, there's much uncertainty regarding the capability of detention basins to contain the runoff. And it's my understanding there's supposed to be zero impact to the watershed. Due to the property's property's special and unique characteristics, we request that this open space be preserved and used in such a way as walkers' vision to respect existing neighborhood characteristics. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ron Perleski. I'm at 3203 Springbrook Drive. I talked last time about the traffic crash facts based off of the U of M's Michigan Traffic Crash Research Institute, UMTRI. Respecting that we've already talked about this, I'm going to skip over that. But I would just like to reiterate the fact that Alpine is the most traffic crash dense road in all of Alpine. And part of the master plans does state to maintain neighborhoods' existing network of highway, roads, streets, sidewalks to accommodate safe and efficient movement of vehicles and pedestrians. Kind of goes a little bit against what the master plan states. In addition, I do agree that the additional stormwater study needs to be completed before the PASP is completed. My neighbor across the street at 3234 Springbrook Drive, new owner, newer build house, the south unnamed stormwater drain has a max of maybe like I think 30 feet away from the foundation of his house. So with what happened with the North York Creek drain, if we see more erosion going through that drain, creating a big culvert, what used to be, like you guys stated, used to be able to step over, now you can't, you gotta go down and up, would definitely eat at his property and probably butt right up against his foundation. So that address I would keep in mind, 3234 Springbrook. It's right across the street from the detention pond that's already in place, one that's already in place due to the apartments that are across the street. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Clarissa Norton, 362 Dakota Drive. After nearly 8 months of work, the developer has not made much meaningful change or compromised based on the feedback from the neighborhood or the city. It appears they have stuck largely to their original plan from 1988, thinking that because it passed then, it would pass today. Their plan does not appear to be ready, yet they submitted it to be reviewed again by the Planning Commission. In reading the submittal narrative, there are only 2 sentences of consideration to the Greenridge neighborhood. It reads, "The surrounding development consists of existing single-family houses and apartment buildings. The proposed development fits the character of the surrounding existing developments in providing additional housing without any on-site commercial uses." That's all. A few weeks ago, we saw through our back windows what appeared to be a wetland survey, but no copy of the report has been submitted to the Planning Commission. It's my understanding that the EGLE was not involved in the survey, a requirement that was set forth by the city of Walker. The timing of the survey makes me wonder how different the survey would look in the spring instead of in the dead of winter. Nevertheless, the new wetlands designated was now included in the maps of their plans, and with the new areas of wetland, the developer has neglected to remove buildings from the wetlands, warranting rejection of their proposal. To my knowledge, no stormwater impact analysis was conducted. The city guidelines mandate a net zero impact on stormwater, a standard that the developer's plan cannot meet. To my knowledge, no private well analysis has been completed. The developer stated that if we have issues with our wells, it would be the responsibility of the city, as they were the ones to approve the plan. This is unknown and non-compliance warrants rejection. To my knowledge, no report has been completed with the Kent County Drain Commission on the impact this development will have on the county drain. The developer intends to dump the water from the north end of the property across township lines to Alpine, creating an impending drainage disaster for our neighbors upstream. Because of these inadequacies, the plan submitted should be rejected by the city of the Walker Planning Commission. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm Logan Norton, that's my wife, 362 Dakota Drive. We've had about 5 days to respond to hundreds of pages from the info packet, but the information provided by the developer was found to be incomplete, failing to address several of the most basic aspects of the PASP checklist. The next section is taken directly from that checklist, which is what the city uses to as a metric to accept or reject a proposal. Section 5, at a public hearing before the Planning Commission, the applicant shall present evidence regarding the following characteristics of the proposed development. Point 8, the economic impact of the planned unit development on the surrounding property values or city as a whole. In response, it is the developer's responsibility to address this, and their lack of any mention at all warrants rejection of their plan as a whole. Section 6, Planning Commission's determination as to whether the PUD, as described in the preliminary area of the site plan, meets the following standards. Point 1, the proposed development shall conform with the city's general development plan or any part thereof. Simply put, this development does not violates neighborhood preservation and green space guidelines laid out by the 2020 master plan. The commission, point 7, the commission shall determine that noise, odor, light, or any other external effect from any source whatsoever which is connected with the proposed use will not adversely affect adjacent and neighboring lands or uses. In response, this has not been addressed, but a dog park with barking and pooping will be heard throughout the neighborhood. When I look out my windows at night, I see 0 lights, only dark woods. The light pollution of a fully lit development would be horrific. Point 9, the impact of the planned unit development on existing wetlands and woodlands. As we've all talked about, they have failed to complete the required reports. Section 7, uses within the proposed PUD may be prohibited if the Planning Commission finds that, point 1, the use would be detrimental or endanger the public. 10 feet deep retention ponds that begin mere feet from our property line present a clear danger to my children. Throughout the topographic map, there are steep cliffs and ponds with no fences around them, a missing requirement that's laid out earlier in the checklist. Point 3, the use would be injurious to the use or enjoyment of other properties in the immediate vicinity. Every single home that borders the subject property was specifically designed to view the golf course with maximum visibility. 38-foot tall buildings towering over our homes would be very injurious to the enjoyment of the western side of our homes. Tenants will have open view into our homes, and our windows will have to be permanently covered for privacy's sake. Point 4, the use would result in significant adverse impact on the natural environment. That's all I have to say. Point 6, the affected public services facilities would not be capable of accommodating the increased services and facility loads caused by use. Our area is currently not covered by the Walker Fire Department 2 weekends out of the month, and it would be irresponsible for the city to approve such a plan without first guaranteeing full-time coverage of your current taxpayers with the highest taxes in the city before adding nearly 200 more units to protect in the area. This is my last paragraph. Given the information presented directly from the PASP checklist, the developer's plan has been inadequately addressed the basic requirements of the checklist or any of the additional stipulations identified. The developer's response to resistance and feedback has not led to any meaningful change or compromise. The developer has resubmitted this plan as ready for re-review, and the Planning Commission has ample reason and duty to unanimously reject this proposal tonight. Thank you for your time.
Hello.
Hello. Hey. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Mike Vanderklok, and I live at 410 Dakota Drive Northwest, and the Alpine York Creek drainage abuts my property.
Is this you, the one?
That is me.
Okay, we have a, I was gonna submit it into the record that we have a letter from Mike S. Vanderklok, DVM, on 410 Dakota Drive Northwest, so,
Thank you.
go ahead.
I appreciate the time and effort the Walker City staff, the Planning Commission, residents of the impacted neighborhood, and the property owner have put into this issue, and the patience and professionalism exhibited by all the parties. I did a cursory review of the information provided in this PASP. In the interest of time, I've submitted a letter to provide it outlines the numerous areas where the PASP is incomplete, inaccurate, or not in compliance with the requirements of Section 94.213 of the PASP ordinance and the PASE process. I'd like to mention a couple of representative examples of issues related to this property in the proposed plan. As one example, the site grading plan, north page C302, includes a catchment basin with a rim that is located below the grade compared directly to the adjacent wetland. A catch basin that is below the adjacent water table will be incapable of serving as a catch basin. Additionally, a rainfall of 2 inches or more happens in this area multiple times a year. Such an event drops almost 2.8 million gallons of water on 50 acres, which is the stated size of this proposed development. The water is currently stored or used on the proposed property by foliage, ground infiltration, and the wetlands. The proposed PUD would eliminate almost all of those features and require 710,000 cubic feet of empty catch basin capacity to contain the runoff. It's common to have a single rain events every few years exceeding 3 to 4 inches in this area. So an actual drainage management system would need to be capable of handling a 24-hour rain event of over 5 million gallons of water. Conducting and maintaining such capacity in the current site is unfeasible. As a second representative item, and was already mentioned, the PASP contains a dog park located next to the homes in the adjacent neighborhood. Dog parks allow dogs to behave like dogs, and it's well known there's a lot of barking. I understand the marketing value of including this item in their project, but its inclusion indicates a lack of understanding of the character of the adjoining neighborhood and a corresponding lack of concern or understanding of the impact of the development in that neighborhood. Such an item would also result in repeated violations of the noise ordinance and is not in compliance with sections 924.213 G2 and 7. Due to the facts and evidence demonstrating the PSAP does not comply with the requirements of 94.213 and the applicant's failure to satisfy many of the conditions imposed by the Planning Commission, I request that this PASP be denied. I also recommend the Planning Commission encourage the applicant to more closely evaluate the property and information provided during this process, and if they so choose to submit an alternate PASP, which is compatible with the character and nature of the parcel and of the adjacent community, and includes mitigations to address the issues identified during these proceedings. A copy of these comments have been provided for the Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mary Ann Fairshung, 3260 Springbrook Drive. I grew up on Greenridge and I lived on Springbrook for the last 20 years. So my comments, I think, have a lot of merit because I've lived on the hill on and off the hill for 48 years. First question is on the final page of the packet that was on the website. There is a very confusing part that indicates there's single-family homes at the end of Greenridge that go behind Dakota. I don't know if this was a previous plan. It's the planning consultant memo analysis of future land use. So I'm not sure what this is or if we're reading it incorrectly, but that hasn't been discussed, and I'm not sure if that's an option, if that was something that was, or why it was included. Do you want to see it? Okay. Second thing is, Frank Wash indicated 3 to 4 times about a cluster development and if it was appropriate for this land, but that was never defined what it is or why it's important or why it keeps coming up. That could be addressed. And then I hate to touch on traffic because that's part of the element of living near Alpine. But when you're considering projects, do you consider the other apartment projects that are also in the process of being approved? Like the one on the golf carts at 4 Mile and the Walmart Road, the one that touches, Alpine Township, and the other ones that I'm sure other developers are looking at because it's a hot commodity of land and all the development in Alpine Township. So I'm just curious, when you're looking at the impacts of this project, are you also looking at the impacts of the other projects so the combined total doesn't overwhelm the area? Thank you.
I just try not to stand in line if I can avoid it. So. Good evening. Thank you, Commission. My name is John Sanford, 318 Timber Creek Circle. I am on the board and the board president of the Timber Creek Condo Association, directly downstream from the proposed development. We are heartened to hear that the Drain Commission is looking at the entire Walker Alpine Drain and looking at solutions for remediation. I think the concerns I have looking at this, which are many, and I'm not going to repeat a lot of what we've heard tonight, is when we look at the existing versus the proposed flow over the 10, 25, and 100-year storm records. I think what we've seen over the last number of years, it seems like we have a 100-year storm 2 or 3 times a year now. And I think those concerns have been mentioned already here tonight. But as we do look downstream and deal with that, as our bridge is undermined, as the creek continues to widen, to be able to say zero impact, how can we say that under current zoning? I don't know that the current zoning, the current flow charts and things like that, quite honestly, absorb the impact of what we're seeing day to day. I think Mother Nature's racing ahead of us at this point. So I would just like you to be able to consider that as we look at what's happening with that development, the amount of water that's been mentioned by a number of people before me coming off this development. I know we would certainly want to balance development as a community as a whole. We need housing. We need affordable housing. We have an owner who owns this property. They certainly have the right to do the things within the zoning that's there, but at the same time, we've got to make sure that the impact of that housing is not going to be detrimental to those in the neighborhood surrounding it who are our neighbors, regardless of what street we're on, that we enjoy walking and enjoying the neighborhood, being able to walk our dogs without having to worry about a dog park nearby, and enjoy where we're at. So. So, and thank you for your time. Thank you for your service. We do appreciate it, and good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ken Stewart, 3256 Springbrook Drive. I'm the neighborhood tree guy, against my better judgment, of course. But a few things I've noted, though, related to trees. this is kind of more of an environmental thing. I see a number of trees going dead quickly, and one of the first things you learn when you start out as doing tree work is outside of not cutting the wrong side of the limb that you're standing on. You never prune red oak from April to early August, maybe even late August. Never prune it. And there's what's called tree wilt that takes a tree in less than a year. Sometimes they say weeks, but I would say what I've seen is a year. And it's a real thing. And there's walking through that property that they're going to be excavating probably soon. At least I hope not, but it needs to be inspected. There are oaks, and based on the structures of those trees back there are many red oaks. And the likelihood that one of them has it is probably pretty good. I'm not an expert in that area of the disease, but I also understand that our oaks are a big staple for all our animals. And as we lose oaks, there's not one animal that wanders around in the woods that doesn't rely on the oaks or the acorns for food in the wintertime. I guess my last thing I want to say is, this is from the Michigan Invasive Species site. They talk about oak wilt. I don't like to quote them, but oak wilt kills healthy red oaks. White oaks can also be affected, but less resistant. Once a red oak becomes infected with the wilt oak fungus, the tree will die. There's no exceptions. It's done. So it is an issue. I never really thought it was until I started removing trees. But just something. One more thing I think should be looked at. When you do have a sighting, the DNR requests that you contact them. I don't know how often that happens. And I've also looked up a graph of where sightings have been noted, and it's definitely in Kent County, and I just think it should be addressed. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
My name is Christine Longcore. I live at 377 Dakota, and I just want to piggyback on what Mary Ann Farris said. My concerns about traffic. Those of us who live off of Alpine know how bad it is. And my understanding is that housing developments have been proposed for the former English Hills and Graceville country clubs, which are not that far from Alpine, and I just concerned that this project, looking at, it's only 3.5% additional traffic, that doesn't necessarily take into account other potential projects that could make the amount of throughway on Alpine much worse. Thank you.
Hi, Jeff Thompson, 3630 Megan Court in Alpine Township. I haven't heard, I agree with all the other comments about the watershed that directly impacts my side of the development, but what I haven't heard tonight is the proposal for the Chick-fil-A on that very same corner where this all exits out, all the traffic from this will exit out. So I just wanted to make sure that that was mentioned and everybody's aware of that, as we all, I'm sure, do.
Thank you. Others?
Good evening. I'm Christine Uzarski from 309 Dakota. Thank you very much for allowing the public comment and for hearing us tonight. Sir, you said not to take this personally. However, living there for as long as I have And obviously, with who we have joining us tonight, this is very personal to a lot of Walker taxpayers. And many of us have paid taxes longer than what that developer has owned. So we have paid into this. I believe our taxes cover your salaries. And we can also change that with the next election. And that's not a threat. And I do appreciate you listening. But it just is, the taxpayers have certain rights and expectations as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Cindy Coleman, and my husband and I live at 583 Kingsbury. I appreciate you mentioning that you got my letter last time, and I have another one that I'd like to submit. And without mentioning deer, there are other concerns that I have. So, but they've already been brought up, and so eloquently, and I appreciate you all being my neighbors, and especially my close neighbors back here that are so well-spoken and eloquent and intelligent and have spoken for me. And so I just want to ask a question, maybe bringing it full circle to our first speaker, and that has to do with, in my naivete, I don't know how this all works with city government. I am a taxpayer, but not knowing how zoning takes place or how rezoning takes place, because I haven't heard if there is any possibility that from way back when until now there's a consideration of maybe zoning it in a different way. And my last point on here has to do with, well, two. One has to do with the green space and the opportunity to maybe rezone it so that it continues to be some sort of workable green space so all of the neighborhood and maybe other taxpayers could enjoy what's there. And the other point that I was wondering about was, I understand, about a shortage of housing. I've heard that on the media, and my understanding is that more has to do with affordable housing. So I'm not sure that this has anything to do with addressing that problem in terms of it being subsidized or, rent supported in any way. I have the feeling that's not the case. Anyway, I do appreciate your time, and I appreciate all of your time, too. Can I give this to someone? Thank you.
Others?
You can't talk any more about drainage, so there's nothing to talk about.
Well, true. Could talk about deer a little, but no, I'm just kidding.
And you're a deer hunter too, aren't you, Dick?
There's a bird called a woodcock.
I make a motion to close. No.
Yeah, I have never seen one. Just what are those woods?
Yes, sir.
My name is Bill Allen, 345 Dakota Drive. One last thing before we part, and I think I speak on behalf of my neighbors. We would like to see today a decision by the Zoning Commission to vote down this development. They have had plenty of time to make amends to the points from June. They have failed to do so. They have been given encouragement on alternative plans, and yet they keep submitting the same unit layout and development over the same property without any changes, because it was approved once. They shouldn't have to make changes. Well, if they're not willing to work with us, they're not willing to work with you, then you should not be willing to work with them. And as a taxpayer citizen in the city of Walker, I would ask you to vote no tonight.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Matt Call, and I'm at 363 Greenridge Drive. I've been in my house for 2 weeks, so I'm the newbie. I don't have the background and knowledge that these folks have, that they presented very well. but I thought it would be a unique perspective from a newbie. I enjoy the outdoors and have concern for traffic coming down because I'm right at the end. I came here tonight because this morning a front-end loader from Kaminga and Rudvoot showed up in front of my house. So I figured I better come and figure out what's going on. So I think somebody mentioned that there's another project that started. I'd like to know where I can find out information about that project so I know how it might impact my property. Is that on the city website, or how would I get information on that project?
Tyler, can I answer?
Yes.
There is a tab on the city's website under the construction projects, but if you want to just give me a call, it's probably easier to talk you through it.
Okay.
I'm the city engineer, so you can
Okay,
find our
great.
number or email and we'll help you out.
Okay, great. I'll give you a call then, and thank you. Nice to meet all of you, and good luck.
Others? If I close it, you can't make any more comments. Okay.
If I may, Mr. Chair, in the event that this project does continue under consideration, I would suggest that we, again, consider suspending the public hearing so that if this does go forward for further review, that there's additional opportunity for the public to provide their comment at that point.
That's up to the PC.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think for our part, just due diligence at this point, the motion would be to suspend the public hearing at this point. So I'll make that motion here.
Okay, motion by Steve, is there support? Terry?
Support.
Or Terry. Support by Pat to suspend the public hearing. That means it's not closed. It is closed for tonight. But with the ongoing development of this development, it's a good idea to leave things a little open. That's legal, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, he wanted me to wear a shot collar. So. But, okay, we have a motion to suspend the public hearing, and we have support. Is there any questions, comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The public hearing is suspended. Planning Commission, comments, questions? Go ahead.
I think it's apparent that with the conversation that's taken place tonight, that there are aspects that have been raised by staff especially that deserve further review, additional information. The developer has indicated that they have updated some of their information in terms of topography, tree cover, even that their ongoing work to work with the, to come up with the wetland information that was requested by this body back in June, that we consider tabling action on the pending PASP. That's where it's easy to say that. Yes, the other part is to detail what it is we're looking for in terms of coming back before the Planning Commission.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if you want, I've been keeping notes, and if it comes to the point where you want to talk about tabling specifics, action items, I can help fill in some of the blanks there.
Thanks, Frank.
I have comments.
Go ahead.
Okay. Number one, I want to say I appreciate everyone being here tonight. Once again, the neighborhood has shown certainly their interest in the project, and I think once again we are happy to see that folks are engaged in what's going on in the city. I will reiterate again that I am the only elected official here, so for folks in the audience, these are all volunteers who essentially contribute their time to participate in the process and are here to hear you. So please be sure to be thankful for what all of them do.
I am the only one here elected to serve, so just putting that into the air. Relative to the project, I have a lot of thoughts, right? There are a lot of balls in the air. Folks have a lot of, I think, legitimate concerns. We have what we consider a lot of balls in the air. One of the big things for me, and this is me speaking on behalf of only myself, but I look at what we have proposed in the master plan, and I don't feel comfortable that we're where we need to be with this project. We spent a great deal of time working on the master plan that we proposed, and when I see that we plan to maintain the density within the project area, and I see the way that we delineated that, we distinctly separated this property from the Greenridge apartments and lumped it in with the neighborhood. And to me, what that says, and the intent that I felt as we were going through that process, was that we saw this as a property where we were going to maintain character of that neighborhood and continue to, I guess, develop this in a way that reflected this as a buffer between the neighborhood and what we have in that development. Once again, speaking on behalf of myself here, I feel that our intention was to try and preserve open space through that area so that we could leave that buffer for that neighborhood to what is a very busy area. Relative to the traffic piece, I think that Terry brings up a great point that we have really busy intersections that this plugs into, and how would traffic at those specific intersections be impacted? Because I view those as some of the most troubled intersections in the entire city, right? Looking at that specifically Center Drive and Alpine Avenue intersection, it's a complex set of movements that are being made there, and folks trying to move in different ways that they can't through the geometry of it. I think that things like that certainly warrant more consideration. I think we've talked ad nauseum about the water impacts, and I think there's a lot of ground to cover before I will feel comfortable voting to approve a project like this relative to that part of it as well. So even beyond my concerns with master plan compliance in the proposal, I feel there's a lot of legitimate concerns about structural pieces of what's proposed tonight. So all that to say, I could go on for quite a while, but I don't feel comfortable moving forward tonight.
Wow, you're going to stand an ovation.
Go ahead, Pat.
To kind of reiterate a little bit what Steve said. Yep, I agree with Steve. I do, this has been zoned this way since the golf course was there. And then when it's tore down and turned into this area. So we know this is coming. We just want to make sure that it's developed the right way and the way we want it to. There's existing water problems. We've all heard about them. We want this development to not make them worse and actually maybe help that. So that's what we have to get, figured out first before we can approve all this, to Steve's point. In looking at this, everybody's like, okay, we got these tall buildings, a lot of the developments that we're doing now, and the one right behind me, they're all single level. So they're all single level condos, apartments, and so on. Maybe that's something we look at so that it blends in from the Greenridge apartments to the single family homes. Maybe that's something we take a look at. I don't know what that's going to do as far as how many units you can get in there, but maybe that's something we look at. Again, the Lincoln Country Club, that's what they're doing there. It really is going to blend the developments. So I get a kick out of dog parks because I'm not a dog owner, but every development we hear has a dog park in it because everybody wants a dog park. And now you guys don't want a dog park, so it's kind of very interesting. So I just bring that up because, that's what every development wants to have now, because take the dogs to certain areas so they do their thing there rather than on your street in front of my house, which I get people picking up their stuff all day long. Anyway, Dakota Drive, I know that can exit out to West River Drive, so that really, it's not a lot of impact on Alpine Avenue unless you go out and try to get to the mall and all that stuff. So the traffic study, which we want to have done maybe a little bit more detail, but it's not going to be as impactful as everybody thinks it is. Alpine already is over, capacity, it seems like. So, and there's things the city engineers are doing to try to make it better. So that is in place. So that's.
Drive is a gate access for condo only.
You can't access it.
But it goes down through Springbrook, Greenridge, and then over to West River.
Yeah, that's your way.
That's your exit out, not to Alpine.
Correct.
So you don't get impacted by this new development in a way. That's what I'm just trying to point out. I'm sorry, what?
Traffic only.
Traffic only, yeah, that's what I was talking about, yeah, just traffic only, not your backyard, having this development in your backyard, no, I get that. That's what I was thinking, maybe take the units, make them single level so they're not as visible from your backyard.
Is there any way we can get a cul-de-sac at Greenridge so we know it won't come through?
Okay, public hearing's done, sorry. Okay, thanks.
Scott?
I'm just going to reiterate a lot of what Steve and Pat said. Not ready to move forward tonight, not comfortable with where we're at. We need to see the wetland reports, more detailed stormwater runoff. There's been some mention about these stormwater detention basins being within the 150-foot buffer. I know the city's not really part of the consent judgment, but there could be some questions there. Maybe that's something the city attorney could answer about. Would a stormwater detention basin be considered a structure within that 150-foot buffer? Those are things we still got to figure out. So all these factors going into play, not comfortable with where we're at right now with this.
Thank you, Scott. Dan?
Picked a great night to start my planning commission career, didn't I? This is my first one. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks everyone for their civility. Made some great points tonight. I'm going to lean on my more experienced colleagues here. I'm listening as a party that's new to everything. I want to hear both sides, of course. Developer has a right. He owns this property, wants to do what he wants to do with it. You guys have a right to challenge. Understand. But all the things we brought up tonight, stormwater is the big issue, right? One of the biggest issues we had. I don't think we have answers to that yet. I think there's still way too many things that need to be, though you guys are all in well water. I didn't even know that tonight, so that's great. We need to find out what's going to do to your water. That's a very important feature. We need to make sure we have these questions answered. So I'm going to follow in the footsteps of these guys on the side of the table as well. I'm a little nervous, can't tell? And I'm also going to choose not to move forward with this tonight.
Mark? Nothing to add? Joe, anything to add?
I don't work, so I got time to drive around these places, and I thought I was going to drive around the whole project, around the perimeter and look at it, and I was mistaken. And after getting lost the first time, I came back a couple days later and tried the same thing. But it's really a unique place, and the ravines up there, and I don't blame you for complaining about stuff. I thought the dog stuff was a little not necessary, but yeah, we're listening. I think we're listening to you, aren't we? Aren't we listening tonight? Yes. Thank you.
Any other comments? I'll make
just
it.
really quickly.
Go ahead.
I just want to add relative to the information on endangered species you included. I just want to bring this up because I looked at that and I didn't feel like it drew me any useful conclusions about whether or not there's endangered species on the site. It kind of referenced that there could be, and to that end, it seems like it didn't necessarily draw us to the conclusion you guys would be seeking. So, and then when I looked further into some of the links it provided, it kind of drew me to some very large, very broad maps about where some of these species are at regionally. So I just putting that out there for future consideration if that's something that you want us to be talking about, because I know it was brought up in the last meeting, but I just didn't feel like that information drew us to any type of conclusion that addressed the concern, and if anything, it maybe raised more questions for me than were addressed. I know it's a small thing relative to the rest of the problems that we're dealing with, but I just wanted to put that out there, but that raised other questions for me.
Thank you, Steve. As far as Frank brought up cluster development, in what I looked at, the north and the south portions are cluster development. The middle is standard. So, I mean, I don't know where we would, if there's any way to, if that even makes a difference to us anymore. I have the same concerns that Steve does. The master plan, we looked at this, we spent a lot of time on this. We wanted to protect the neighborhood. Greenridge is already a lot of fun. Also, the 150 foot, I would not feel right as a planning commissioner to approve a PASP saying those could be in there, then have the neighbors file an injunction to stop the development and name the city of Walker and part of that injunction when we really don't have anything to do with it. So I need a lot of clarification on that 150 foot. If there's going to be detention ponds there and they're deep ponds, you have to have a fence around them, which is a structure. So I'm not sure where they're going with that. Downstream is a mess. I walked all the way to the apartments down north, up to where York Creek goes under some stuff, and it is a mess down there. I appreciate the neighbors letting me do that. I didn't want to trespass, but I think we need a lot more. We need a lot more definition, and I think the developer needs to look at the master plan a little bit and see if they can do something different. That's my opinion. That being said, I don't feel we have the right to deny this because it is zoned as it is zoned and they have the right to develop it. We can keep tabling it for the next 10 years or whatever. But if the city attorney agrees with that we probably should keep tabling. What? Pardon? Pardon? Okay. I don't think we have a whole lot more to add tonight. If we're going to table it, we need a list of what we need the developer to do. So I would entertain a motion. I would entertain a couple people putting together a motion. What's your pleasure?
Frank indicated that he was kind of taking a tally of things that we've talked about this evening, and I think that might be a good starting point to see what he would enumerate and see whether there's anything that would have been missed.
I did want to mention something else. The private well analysis, unless there's a plume or a reason to force the developer to do a private well analysis, I don't know that we could do that. And I don't think there's a reported plume up there, so.
Well, I'll try and fill in some of the blanks on that.
Okay, go ahead, Frank.
Okay, bear with me on this because I'm trying to list what the Planning Commission and the public has talked about tonight. If you're going to make a motion to table, I would recommend the following. One of the action items would be to get a formal legal interpretation from the city attorney on the city's role in adhering to the private consent agreement from 1989. The pros, the cons, the definition of a structure. I think that's a very significant item on this site. So I think that's definitely something that should be done. We did something similar for Vista 45. You had a legal opinion put together. It takes time, and I would certainly encourage you to make that a condition of approval, or excuse me, a condition of tabling. Item number 2 would be under the general heading of hydrology. You really need more information from a hydrological standpoint, from a hydraulic standpoint on impacts to the Alpine Walker drain. And I remain concerned about that unnamed drainage course to the southeast. And this is where the well analysis should probably come in as well. I'm not qualified to outline a hydrology study, but from a watershed management standpoint, it seems like you need to get quite a bit more information from the Drain Commission office and from the Health Department on potential impacts to the surface waters and the private well water. particularly when I talk about private well water in that southeastern section, because if you look at the aerial or if you've walked that site, there's a lot of water near the surface. And as people have said tonight, the creek is narrow. And I can't help but thinking that this is the same situation we had with the Alpine Walker Drain 35 years ago, which started out the same way. An awful lot of groundwater coming out of these hills and then going from a step over stream to a completely out of equilibrium water course that's caused nothing but problems for decades. So that would be item number 2 under the general heading of hydrology study. Work with Drain Commission and the Health Department. They have jurisdiction over the drain and they also have jurisdiction over the wells, and come back with a comprehensive report on current status and then potential impacts to those water resources. Can be done. Number 3 would be, well, we covered the private wells, so let's go to number 4. Wetland analysis, they are seasonal. I know you can flag in the wintertime, but if anyone who's familiar with wetland science, you see different things in the growing season, and particularly once the rain starts. So that may be something that you want to say, hey, we need a wetland analysis done in the spring or the summer, as opposed to the winter. That may not be a popular opinion, but at least with the applicants, but I think that's something that in this case, because of all the hydrology problems we're having and potential impacts, the wetland analysis should be done in the growing season. My opinion, but that would be something that you could add to the list. Number 5 is an expanded traffic study. At the very least, we need to get what we call level of service impacts at the intersection of North Center and Alpine Avenue and at the intersection of Center and Alpine Avenue. That should include the new developments in the area, including the Chick-fil-A, and it should also include the changes that will be made with the roundabout project, which should really help a lot of that bizarre left turning that causes so many conflicts, because that island is going to be one continuous island. The left turning will be taken out of that situation, but so I think you can probably say, hey, we need a full traffic study on this one, folks, that shows all of the proposed projects and impacts in this area. Number 6, and I fully support getting that tree cover plan to identify where you have the large trees. We should do the best we can to preserve those. And so there should be an aerial overlaid on the existing survey to see where that information is for you folks. And number 7 would be the endangered species report. I know the applicant provided one of those more at the national level. As I've said originally, I think we need comments from DNR. Now, know that DNR holds endangered species information very close to the vest for a variety of reasons. Typically, if word gets out that there's an endangered species, if it's a plant, somebody goes out and picks it or digs it up, and if it's an animal, somebody goes out and shoots it. So that's why DNR holds that data very close to the vest. However, I think that's something that we should ask the developer to do, and staff, again, is more than willing to reach out to DNR and say, hey, we don't want to make, specific information public, but please let us know if there's anything we should know about on this site, or at least in the general area. So those are 7 items for tabling. For your consideration, I can compile those. We've also got them on the audio recording that'll go into the minutes. So there you have it.
That does not address the master plan.
I'll add some comments on that from a planning standpoint. It's number 1 on your list, and I think Steve raised this list. So again, if you don't feel that the project is consistent with the master plan, that's another issue that we need to talk about. What we talked about on tabling here were more specific items, related to what the application and the material submitted date has to do with. The general question of does this meet the master plan is something that needs to be discussed. And that's where I'm going to look for Mr. Sluggett, City Attorney, to help us out on that if we get into that discussion tonight, or we can revisit it based on what gets resubmitted. And the kicker is, the master plan is a guide for future land use.
Right.
The zoning is the law. And so what we've pointed out all along is this site is zoned RPUD2. Can the city change the zoning? Yes. I'm gonna stop right there because, but hold on, because this, now we're starting to get into more of the legal implications of zoning. And the city should not flippantly change zoning midstream. So I'm going to ask for the city attorney to help fill in some of the blanks there, because again, it's a process that's based in law, so.
Sure.
So, in terms of whether rezoning would be appropriate or not, that's ultimately a decision for both the planning commission and city commission ultimately to make. A number of factors go into a determination to rezone property. Typically, what does the master plan call for in terms of, as Frank said, it's a guideline. Does the current zoning reflect what's called for in the master plan, in the future land use map? Has there been a change in circumstances from the rezoning, in this case, which occurred in 1989, and other factors? But it's an analysis that typically the city will go through in looking at that question. So, and it's not, I would strongly discourage you from trying to take it up this evening. I don't think you have the information or data available to you to properly do that.
And my opinion would be that, to build on what Jeff was saying, you need more than just a statement that this project is inconsistent with the master plan to deny. Because you've already taken a lot of action to table based on data, based on findings of fact. So my advice would be that if you're inclined tonight to just say, we need to shut this thing down because it's not consistent with the master plan, that's probably premature. We should probably table this with the list of items that we have, say to the developer, you can't come back until you've completed these items, so we don't get into a due process issue here, and then see what comes back. Because if one way or the another, you'll need to develop multiple findings of fact on this project.
I've been here for about 3 years, and I've been impressed with what good help we have for a small community with those two guys that just talked. And I thought they were very well prepared and answered everything, and they had consultants for us, and I'm proud of you guys. You're well prepared. Thank you.
Others? Otherwise, go ahead, Terry.
A couple of us have, there have been several comments from the commissioners here concerning consistency with the master plan. And I guess I want to weigh in on that a bit. Given some of the information that been provided to us by staff, and one of the first things that, and the report that Frank pointed out was that as far as is this a clustered development right here? And he also provided additional information that defines how do you come to that conclusion. In this case here, I look at this and I look at the grading plan as the best exhibit of it. You look at that grading plan, right up the middle of that entire site, there's going to be an earth change associated with it. Whether it's to regrade the area for stormwater, or if it's to establish a location for a building site, for the traffic to move through the private street system in there. If you contract that swath up the middle, then you start to, I think, get at what's clustering. You, in order to do that, you start pulling your units together, more concentrated, so you preserve more of the overall site, not just on the perimeter, but within the site as well. And that's where I don't feel that this is a cluster development, and that because a cluster development its intent is to preserve those natural features that are valued in the community. And I don't feel that the plan that's been submitted to us accomplishes that. I think it would have to contract that pad there on the property in order to approach that.
And I think the information that we've asked for previously, and it's been laid out tonight, is vital information in order to the developer to evaluate how to accomplish that if they're so inclined, and for us to evaluate that as the plan comes back to us. From my standpoint, I don't believe on 50 acres of property right here that it's unreasonable to have as many as 186 housing units on it. But how it's built, how it's designed and built on the site, I think is very important, and that's what we're trying to address this evening. And we're trying to give direction to the developer on the type of information we feel is important to move in that direction.
Thank you, Terry. Other comments? Or action?
Would it be fair for me to move to table the project on the basis of the conditions outlined by the community development director?
I believe so. It's in the
without
record.
specifically outlining all of them again.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll put those in the minutes, and then they're already on the audio recording as well. And as long as city attorney says okay, then we're good.
Joy.
Okay, I have a motion by Steve to table with said comment.
Hold on, 1 second.
Oh, go.
Sorry, real quick, just for clarification and for purposes of the record, the intent being that when those items have been compiled and we're made aware of that fact by the developer, then at that point it would be placed on the agenda again, is that correct? Okay, thank you.
We have a motion by Steve. Is there support?
Second.
Support by Scott. Questions or comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. It is tabled. Thank you for coming. We have a little bit of business yet to do. If you want to stay, it's not exciting. But if we can exit quickly and quietly so we can finish, we'd appreciate it. Thank you for coming.
Please take any discussion outside the room.
Please exit the room. They don't get it. No. Yep. Yeah, and they make some changes and they justify it. Yeah. Yeah, so much can change.
But the thing is that, yeah, but the thing is, there's so many of these details come out fine.
Okay, let's call the meeting to order, please. We need to elect officers for the coming year. So we'll take suggestions. Terry's been the chair, I've been the vice chair, Jason was the secretary. So we need a new secretary, which I would nominate Pat for.
I'm actually looking at retiring, so I may be off this commission in about a year, so.
We'll just do it for a year.
So it wouldn't put me down for long. A year of doable service.
Will you do it for a year? Secretary, you have to sign stuff. You will? And I'd nominate Terry for chair.
How about a motion to retain Terry as chair, Tyler as vice chair, and to elect Pat as our secretary? Let's
There you
roll
go.
it all into one, and
Is that a motion?
yes.
We have a motion by Steve. Is there support?
Second.
Support by Joe. All in favor, say aye. Opposed? Dan, you have one official job. Oh, you have to make the motion to adjourn.
Now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do that part. I'd like to make a
Hold
motion.
it, we need an update, quick.
Quickly, before we adjourn, just some comments about upcoming meetings. So on the February 15th meeting, we have 2 items coming up. The precise plat amendment for Northridge Drive East is coming, and that's where the English Hills development is, and it's adjusting the precise plat in a small way. That'll be here. And then we also have a site plan review for West Pharmaceuticals. Their revisions came in today. I haven't even had a chance to look at them yet. They're on my desk, and so that will be here for an expansion of their facility and the North Wilson Commerce Park, as well as a new parking lot for them. And nothing came in for the March 1st meeting, so it looks like you might get a night off.
Great.
I will be
What about
absent.
Chick-fil-A? They haven't pulled any permits yet or anything? Yeah. Ah. Great.
They just notified the tenants.
Okay,
I will be absent in 2 weeks. I will not be here, so I will be on vacation.
okay. Thanks, Pat.
And with that, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. If you don't like it, so what?